Good morning and welcome to our Wednesday morning daily briefing here on We Are Sunderland with myself, Dom Shaw, and I'm joined by Joe Ramage, one of our two designated Sunderland writers at We Are Sunderland. If you haven't tapped subscribe yet, then just click that button underneath this video, because then you'll get alerted to every time a new video is published, which is several times a week. So do tap subscribe and leave a comment if there's anything you want us to discuss, either today or in the coming days and weeks, obviously. We're going to talk about Jack Clarke, Joe, because the inevitable transfer links came about again yesterday. I say inevitable because on the back of the summer, it was always likely that there was going to be more talk. Now, we can determine whether it is talk or whether that's more likely to lead to something in the coming weeks. But it was West Ham United who were heavily linked yesterday, according to Sky. What are your general thoughts on it, first of all?
It's not surprising, really, is it? I think you said it there. They're not the first club from the Premier League who are interested. It's the latest. I think there'd be more. Who was it in the summer? We've had Crystal Palace linked with them, Burnley, Sheffield United, Brentford, West Ham now in that mix as well. To me, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of teams, sort of from mid-table down, wouldn't be interested in. Why wouldn't you be, given the sort of stats and the numbers that he's putting up this season? He's really sort of kicked on from what he did last season with Sunderland, and I do believe one way or the other he will be in the Premier League next season. Let's not be clouded by last week's performance against Newcastle. He's putting in a really good season, and it's progression year on year since he joined Sunderland on loan. To be honest, when he first came in League One, there was a little bit of not sure about that, but last season he was excellent. This season he's taken it to a whole nother level. So it's not surprising that the teams in the Premier League of substance are taking interest in him whatsoever.
I guess the first thing to touch on is what you're saying there about how this season he's taken it to a whole new level, which really is testament to his character and his attitude, isn't it? Because on the back of the summer, when he didn't get a Premier League move, some players would have sulked and some players would have kind of let that frustration spill over, and it would have impacted their displays. And yet Jack Clarke's done the direct opposite. And Tony Mowbray spoke regularly, didn't he? And Michael Beale will inevitably be asked about this at his press conference on Thursday, obviously. But Tony Mowbray spoke regularly about how he had absolutely no concerns about Clarke, despite the fact he didn't get that move in the summer, which does say so much about his character, doesn't it? And his attitude and the type of person he is.
Absolutely, and I think that's something else that will only help him in terms of getting interest from these clubs. But it's not just that. I mean, you think of everything that's happened at Sunderland over the last 18 months in terms of they've seen two managers, the players they've seen two managers who have left, who they all got on with in Alex Neil and Tony Mowbray. The relationship that the squad clearly had with both of them, it's evident to see. So to see both of them leave in different, certainly not for results based, it is difficult. And again, as a squad, as players, as individuals, they could, as you said, like sort of throw the toys out the pram if you were, and that doesn't seem to have happened. They've just got their heads down and carried on, and he's been absolutely instrumental in that. He is Sunderland's go-to since they didn't have a striker, and since they saw Ross Stewart, and the way that the four strikers that they signed haven't really adapted to the league, adapted to the North East. He's the one who's really taken that burden of scoring goals week in, week out, and he looks as though he's thriving on it, particularly in the Championship. He's absolutely thriving on it. And like I say, the numbers that he's putting up, there's only 3 who've scored more than him this season, but he's top of so many of the sort of charts of the data now dictates the game, and he's top of so many of the charts that you would want if you're looking for a player to move and make that next step. So it really is. It's no surprise that there is interest. Like I say, it wouldn't be surprised me if there's further interest. And the worry is it could be difficult to keep him this month, which would be, I mean, what a massive blow that would be to Sunderland. For me, you can't really sell him this month because you're almost then talking about a whole rebuild job in January, and we're already nearly halfway through it. So Sunderland have got to try and dig the heels in and at least try and eke it out until the summer.
We'll talk in a minute or two about what happens when Clarke inevitably goes, which seems unless Sunderland win promotion this season, but it does feel like that it's inevitable at some stage at the minute. As things stand now, what do you think he's worth?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, you look at players who've gone before. I've I think it was Kane Lewis-Potter, wasn't it? He went to Brentford for sort of about 20 million, if I'm not mistaken. I think Alex Scott, Bristol City, he was linked around 20-25 million. I think it was Wolves who were interested in the summer. You've got to sort of put him in that ballpark, really, don't you? Given his age, his young English talent. It's inflated fees, we all know, but the fact that he is up at the top of those, I think he's top of the expected goals and assists list. I think he's third or fourth in the actual goal scoring list. In terms of things like progressive carries, he's so far in front of the next person. Dribbles 1v1, all the sort of things that an attacking player needs to be to stand out. He is standing out. So you've got to be looking. For Sunderland, they've got a little bit of security in the fact that I think he's contracted until 2026, so there's still another 2.5 years on his deal. So that adds further finance to the deal as well. You've got to be looking between 20 and 25 million really to sort of even invite the conversation. For me, I think Burnley was around about 10 million in the summer, wasn't it? And there were suggestions at maybe 15 million. But if you think of the season that he's then gone on and had so far, it's only added to that fee, hasn't it? So in terms of West Ham, if you look at where he would fit in, I think he'd be sort of replacing Benrahma, wouldn't he? That looks as though it's that sort of area. I think Lucas Paquetá, he's drifted over to that left-hand side, just having a little bit of a look through West Ham this season. But is he more of a number 10? And again, he's someone who West Ham might lose themselves in the summer, given his form. So yeah, you've got to be looking at that kind of fee. I think they paid similar, about 25 million for Benrahma from Brentford a couple of years ago. And the market's only gone up anyway, so you might be doing yourself out of money there as well. But if he was to keep going in this sort of vein, I think he's on 12 goals this season. If he was to sort of end up near 20 goals this season from not being an out-and-out striker, it's an incredible effort, So I don't see why Sunderland shouldn't demand anything less than around sort of 20 million, to say the least.
I completely agree. I think you're absolutely at the starting point looking at 20 million. But I know when obviously Brentford, I think it was, or Burnley, wasn't it, who had the 2-3 bids knocked back in the summer, It was 10 million and rising. And I think the feeling in the Clarke camp was, obviously Clarke's contract was signed in 2022, just after Sunderland had won promotion from League One. And I know that the feeling was, well, if you're turning down £10 million plus for him, is he on the contract of a £15 million player? Is he on the contract of a £20 million player? And I guess if you're in Clarke's camp now, you're saying, well, if you're going to reject these offers, you need to reward him and pay him like a 15-20 million pound player, don't you? And I guess that's the balance Sunderland have got to strike. Would now be the right, if you're Jack Clarke, would now be the right time to move, or is it better to hold off? And the reason I ask is, this kind of feels like an important move for Clarke, doesn't it? Because obviously we're aware of what happened in Leeds and Tottenham when he went as an 18-year-old kid. Huge ask to go and play in a team like Tottenham and everything that surrounds that when you're an 18-year-old kid. Obviously had to take a step back. But now he's got such momentum. He wants to keep building that, doesn't he? And this next move, whenever it is, feels like one he has to get right.
Yeah, it certainly does. Just to quickly go back to sort of the wage structure as well, that would then throw the kind of whole model under scrutiny, wouldn't it? If they move the goalposts for him and then you'll get the next person coming up. In my point of view, would then turn around and say, well, go and sort of produce the kind of numbers in your field of what Jack Clarke's doing. But if there's a Premier League club who could hypothetically treble, quadruple his wages, it's going to be hard not to have your head turned, to step up and get such an increase in your wage. But yeah, for him as well, I think he's 23 now, so he's getting to that age where, there's still so much of his career left, but there's still so much potential to tap into. Will it get to a point where he's kind of done all he can at Sunderland? If he is to stay this season, Sunderland don't get promoted, is that kind of his ceiling at Sunderland? Because he's clearly worthy of being in a team that should be fighting for promotion in this division. Now, I know Sunderland are, they're sixth in the table at the minute, but they've never really threatened the automatics. Certainly this season, there was a little bit of time, sort of this time 12 months ago, where they were in and around sort of third and fourth in the division, but the way that the league sort of improved in standard this year, and the top four, how much they've ran off, that's never really been in reach for Sunderland this year. So if he was to stay and Sunderland don't get promoted, like I say, it does feel as though that is kind of, I've done all that I can for you this year, and over the last 2 years really, and he would be deserving of the move. You wouldn't begrudge him of it. I think him as a player as well, he'll harbour ambitions of trying to break into an England squad. Really, if you look at those positions, no, I'm not for 1 second saying he should be in the England squad. You know, the talent that is in the ranks at that level. You know, but the only way he can get himself involved in that conversation is by being in the Premier League and playing week in, week out, and kind of doing what he's doing now at that level. Going to somewhere like West Ham would give him a really good chance of doing that. You know, we've seen players, you know, look at Jared Bourne, how he's forced himself into the England squad, moving into that central role at West Ham. He came from Hull City, didn't he, where he was producing similar sort of numbers. So, yeah, it's a really important move from him, and somewhere like West Ham kind of fits when you think about it. When, you know, I've just mentioned Bourne there, and you look at other players, Declan Rice, how he's gone through the academy there and stood out for himself. You know, English talent. I think Aaron Cresswell moved left back. He went there from Ipswich, didn't he? You know, so they've had sort of a little bit of history of, not just off the top of my head, of players that have come from championship clubs and kind of kicked on and developed there. And they're a side who've been in Europe the last couple of years, obviously won the conference last season. So that would, in my mind, would be a decent move for him. Yeah, it's critical. It certainly makes more sense that him going somewhere like that than somewhere like a Burnley or a Sheffield United, who it looks as though they're probably going to come back down into the Championship, doesn't it? I think it would be a little bit naive if he was to move out of Sunderland this month to go somewhere like that. I think you'd rather hedge your bets and stay with Sunderland this season to see if he can get Sunderland promoted. So it will be someone who will be like a West Ham or a Brentford, somebody like that, where you can look to kick on in sort of the top half of the Premier League.
As you were talking there, I was just looking to try and find some Mowbray quotes that I remember him saying. I couldn't find them, but I did find Mowbray talking about Clarke after the Millwall game. We all know that obviously what happened next, but he was talking about kind of Clarke and the inevitable interest that was going to come in January, and he was asked then if Clarke was worth more than what he left Leeds United for Spurs. And he said, I'll let you decide that, but I think so. I know for a fact that the club wouldn't even consider probably double that in the modern market. And then he goes on to praise Clarke. But then he talks about what you were saying there. I think he knows he has to be playing. He likes it here. It's a huge jump to Premier League, though, of course, you've seen players like Bowen and Ben Rama do it. I can't tell you what Jack is thinking other than he enjoys playing in this team and playing with his mates. I don't know what the future holds other than that he enjoys playing his football here. There are countless examples of players who've gone to the Premier League and kicked on, like Bowen. But then there are countless examples of players who've gone to the Premier League and lost that momentum and stuttered a bit and then had to take a step backwards. What will be interesting and what I was looking for in the Mowbray quotes initially was, I remember Mowbray talking about the fact that when or if and when Clarke does go and he goes for mega money, what Sunderland do next? Because Mowbray talked about how he'd quite like the idea of Sunderland going out and maybe spending £10 million on a player rather than, you know, if you say get £25 million for Clarke, I don't for 1 minute expect them to invest every single penny of that into scouring replacements. But rather than try and buy 3 or 4 players, say, for 3 or 4 million quid, are you better off going out and spending 10 million on one? It goes back to like the Liverpool Luis Suarez and Spurs Gareth Bale sales, doesn't it? And what they did. And that really is the great unknown. We touched on this, didn't we, in our video on Monday? That really is the great unknown with this Sunderland model at the minute, isn't it? But I suspect we're going to get the answers probably in the next year, because if it's not Clarke, then is it Dan Neil? Is it Anthony Patterson? Dan Ballard? There are countless examples through the team, aren't there?
Yeah, there is, and it is an interesting question how you do it. I think you mentioned Spurs there, didn't you? I mean, you think of where they put that 80 million, didn't really stretch them that far, even though on the face value, I think they brought the likes of Soldado, Van der Vaart, a couple of others in, Eric Lamela, players like that. It didn't necessarily work out, did it? So would they have been better off just going and bringing in sort of what they would class as almost a like for like, rather than trying to patch it up with 4 or 5 different players? I do think if they got the sort of fee that they would want, i.e. sort of 20, 25 million, you would suspect, you'd have to break the structure a little bit and bring somebody in who is valued or certainly has a reputation for getting similar numbers as what Clarke is getting. You know, you look at, I think is it Carvalho who's about to leave Liverpool to go to Hull. Somebody like that, possibly. You know, he's got decent numbers, and he certainly did well for Fulham in the Championship the other year. I think the obvious one for Sunderland supporters would be somebody like Ahmad coming back.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
I mean, that's such an interesting one, isn't it? You know, he kind of put those numbers up. I think he what was it, 17 or 18 goal contributions last season. But with Tony Mowbray going to Birmingham, given the relationship they had, does that throw a spanner in the works of that potential move? It's so tough. I think who else have Sunderland been linked with? I think they were linked with a winger from Lille, Alan Virginius, is it? That kind of move wouldn't necessarily, I don't personally think that would appease Sunderland fans. You know, someone like that could come in and totally hit the ground running.
I was going to say unless he comes in and completely hits the ground running, yeah.
But that's another lad. I think he's 20, 21-year-old coming over from a different league, stepping up over here. It's another big risk, isn't it? That is where the model is at, but that is a huge risk. Whereas, would you be happier with somebody like an Ahmad come in who you saw firsthand what he did last season and what he's capable of? So I do think they would have to move the boundaries of what the model is if and when they get the fee that they're going to get for Jack Clarke.
Sorry, I was just looking at the site. Dan Neil, you've done a piece on Dan Neil, and he is another one, isn't he? Who's going to? I don't think this month, but in the summer, there's bound to be inevitable interest there. Anthony Patterson, Dan Ballard. I guess what Sunderland have to keep doing is showing to the players that this is the place that they want to be, that they're going to continue the upward trajectory of the last 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, Dan Neil will be. He certainly, I think it was it Liverpool who were credited with an interest with him earlier this month. And, you know, you look at, based on Saturday against Newcastle, he was probably the one for me who did look the most comfortable at that level. He was the one who kind of did retain possession in midfield up against sort of Newcastle's midfield, who've, what have we got there, 40 million quid's worth in Joe Linton, and the same with Bruno Guimaraes. So he did do himself, I thought he'd done okay. And yeah, he's just another one. I agree. I don't think he would be someone who might leave this month. I think if any of them are going to go this month, it would be Jack Clarke. But Dan Neil certainly down the line in the summer, possibly, if he keeps going again, is someone who you can see taking that next step up. And it's interesting because it does feel as though the model's kind of moved a little bit. You mentioned them players there in terms of Clarke coming in, Patrick Roberts coming in, Dan Ballard coming in. That it just feels a little bit different to moving over to the likes of sort of an Abdullah Bar, Adil Al-Shish who've come in, you know, Nazir Rusin. It feels as though they're tapping more into the sort of foreign market at the minute, certainly over the last 6 months or so, than initially when they got promoted. So is there a balance to be had between both? I'd argue probably yes, because you've seen the success of those players. It's those players who look as though they're going to kick on. In terms of the ones who came in last summer, there's none really that you would say that you'd be worried about losing or bringing in a sizable fee in the course, like over the next 6 months, because at the minute they haven't quite adjusted yet. Now I know that might be a little bit harsh because it's only been 6 months into a new league and the in and out of teams and things like that, and there's different head coaches. But I think I said it to you on Monday as well. Ballard, for example, I remember that first game against Coventry last season when Sunderland got promoted. You could see already the sort of step up in quality that Sunderland were getting. Jack Clarke, they had him in League One, but the way he's progressed since the start of the last season, you know, Patrick Roberts again, he was another one. It doesn't feel as though the ones that have come in the summer have done that in terms of hitting the ground running like that. So I think there's definitely scope for them to be sort of realigning how they are focusing in the summer and who they're going to bring in.
But I think Bale's press conference will be interesting on Thursday because it will inevitably be asked about the fallout from the derby, really, and some of the conversations there. But then clearly it'll be moved on, and I think there's obviously going to be questions on Clarke. There's going to be questions probably on Ahmad and whether that's a possibility, but also on the centre forward. And I know just very, very briefly, finally, we touched on Kiefer Moore earlier in the week. I think the question, maybe if it's not specifically on Moore, it's does Sunderland have to move away from the model and almost find a bit of a quick fix, I guess, to see him through until the summer and then reassess up front? It feels like something has to change up there, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Again, especially if you're selling Jack Clarke, if there's any sort of possibility of that happening. I mean, you think back to the summer window with Ross Stewart. The longer that went on, it felt as though Sunderland were saying, okay, we're going to be happy to keep him. He's going to be fit sort of end of September, beginning of October. We'll take that risk and then we'll keep him and we'll see what happens in January. And then they ended up selling him on deadline day, and you're potentially leaving yourself short. Now, obviously, how that's worked out at Southampton for him is really unfortunate, and it turns out that it ended up being a really good move by Sunderland. If they were to get rid of Jack Clarke, or allow him to leave rather, like I said at the start of this video, you're almost then having to do a mini rebuild in January, which is, it's almost impossible, isn't it, to do that? You'd almost be admitting defeat and taking yourself out of the promotion race if you were to let Jack Clarke go this month. But in terms of restructuring, it goes beyond even just bringing a striker in. You look at somebody like Alex Pritchard. He's now into the final 6 months of his contract, and you've seen over the last month the impact that he can have. I think it would be he'd be more than worthy of having another year deal, but that it doesn't seem as though that'll be something that'll be likely either. If you look back at the quotes at the beginning of the season, fits outside of the model. They let Lyndon Gooch go, they let Danny Bath go. Pritchard certainly falls into that category of players that they kind of happy to move on from and not give longer term contracts to. Again, is there wriggle room? Is there a little bit of leeway that can be had? I think they probably need to start having the conversations that don't totally move away from it, because as you said, again, everyone looks at Brentford and Brighton, don't they? But if you look at Brighton, they've brought in the likes of sort of Adam Lallana, James Milner. There's players like that where they've gone in and they've brought in experienced heads just to help these other guys along. And, keeping somebody like Alex Pritchard, it makes sense. It just totally makes sense. Likewise, bringing in somebody who knows how to run the top end of the pitch, like a Kiefer Moore who can hold it up. You already think if someone like him came in, how him and Pritchard could link up, and then how much would that help somebody like a Joe Bellingham, who is still learning the trade in that role, rather than having to flip between being a 10 and a 9. He's only 18-year-old and he's already played 50 games in his career. There is a worry that somebody like that could get burnt out because of, there is an expectancy on him, rightly or wrongly, just because of who he is, So keeping somebody like Alex Pritchard alongside him would help, but it would help then getting some experience up front in front of him as well. So there's definitely scope to just adjust the boundaries a little bit of the model. Keep your principles, but let's, when it makes sense, adjust it and bring people in who it would fit, whether, like you say, for a short-term fix, certainly in January to the end of the season, or for a contract for somebody like Pritchard for another 18 months.
Interesting couple of weeks ahead off the pitch, and hopefully Sunderland get back on track on the pitch at Ipswich on Saturday evening. We've got all the build up to that on We Are Sunderland over the next couple of days. If you haven't already, you'll see the offer running across the bottom of the screen there. It's just £1 for 6 months to sign up and take advantage of exclusive interviews with current and former players, long reads, tactical deep dives, and obviously every word from Michael Beale's press conference, the latest of which will take place at the Academy of Light tomorrow on Thursday afternoon. Thanks, Joe. As I said at the start, if you haven't already tapped subscribe, then please do that, and do let us know in the comments section if there's anything you want us to discuss on these daily videos. And we'll be back tomorrow with our latest episode on We Are Sunderland. Enjoy your day. Thanks very much.